各位观众，今天我们非常荣幸，李显龙国务资政来这个跟我们进行这一场炉边对话。那么在开始之前，我先说一下今天的这个规则啊，就我会发挥这个主持人的这个作用，先跟资政有一段对话，然后最后我们会留一些时间，也让观众可以提问。实际上我们刚才其实已经收集了一些问题那么因为这个慧眼中国是可中可英那么先请允许我用英语来跟这个资政提问。
也允许我用英语回答。
SMES start by asking about Suzhou Industrial Park. Since we are celebrating the 30th anniversary this year, you co-chaired the Joint Steering Committee with Vice Premier Li Lanqing right from the beginning. So after 30 years, what do you think of the project? Is it a good model for bilateral collaboration with China? What have we learned from that?
It was a very successful project, looking back over these 3 decades. It was our first government-to-government project between the Singapore government and the Chinese government. Very high-level, focused support, and a very specific objective which fitted China's needs at that time, which was it was in a process of opening up. It was experimenting with developing high-quality business environments, investment facilities. It was looking for ways to attract in MNC investments, and how do you promote them, how do you deal with them, and then how do you look after them after they come in. So we launched into this, me and Vice Premier Li Lanqing chairing the Joint Steering Committee. Later it became the JCBC, Joint Coordination 双边协调委员会. And it covered not only this project, but also many other cooperation projects between Singapore and China, which were important. And from this project, we went to do a second project in Tianjin and Eco-City. We went to do a third project, which was in Chongqing, which is the Hailu Hulian Hutong, which is a land-sea corridor between the western part of China and the South China Sea, Beibuwan. And we also have a Guangzhou Knowledge City. So in that process, discussing very substantive, meaningful proposals which were relevant to both sides, we developed cooperation, friendship, mutual trust and understanding, and both sides also obtain substantial benefits from the actual SIP in Suzhou. For example, on the Chinese side, the SIP was a flagship project. It's a symbolic project which everybody knows about all over China, and people came to visit from all over China. And they look at this first conclusion: it can be done. That's very important. Second, they pick up ideas how it is done. And third, they go back to their own provinces, their own cities, their own responsibilities, and they applied these ideas each in their own way. And therefore, there were projects all over China which I think took inspiration from what we achieved in Suzhou. This apart from the fact that in Suzhou itself, the SIP became a very major city. In fact, it's a city which is now maybe 1/3 the size of Singapore. So I think on China's side, there was great benefit. On Singapore's side, we also benefited greatly because it gave us a certain reputation that we knew how to work with the Chinese, that we could get things done, we could get the projects implemented, and the ideas can work.
But it was challenging.
Of course, it was quite challenging at the beginning. The cultures were different. There was not that mutual trust. And we had to do things which were quite difficult. For example, when we prepared the land for the project, the project team says, we'd like to raise the land 1 meter because we are near the Yangtze-Jiang and you have floods every now and again, and I think this is safer. And it was not the practice in China. If the floods come, you live with that. And they had learned to do that. But our project team says, invest in it. It'll take longer, it'll cost more, but it will pay off. And we did. And a couple of years later, it so happened there was a very big annual flood, and I think everybody was glad it was done. And there were other difficulties also, because initially we were the majority partner, 60, Chinese side 40. And when you're doing a project like this, you have many discussions. You have to be able to have give and take. And not everything can be pinned down according to the contract. And when the majority partner is a foreign partner, it's very difficult politically for the Chinese side to say, I will make this adjustment. This is a small concession in the context of an overall cooperation. So we had many difficult conversations. Eventually, we solved it by saying, no, you take majority, 60, we'll go 40, you take the lead, I think it's easier for you to work. And when we did that, I think the political difficulties became less, the practical problems could be solved, and the project moved ahead. And year by year, the Chinese side took more and more prominent role in the leadership of the project, and we eventually evolved to a more supportive role. But the project continued to grow and prosper, and we were very happy to see it do that. Today, it has gone well beyond what we expected. We started with 15 square kilometers. We had planned for 80 eventually, 3 phases. Today, there are about 270 square kilometers, well beyond where it was. And the projects have evolved to have high-tech projects, to have research and development projects, to have academic institutions, universities present there. I think NUS has a presence there too. And it has kept up to date. So we are very happy as proud parents. Last year, President Xi Jinping visited SIP. It was his first stop when he went to Jiangsu province, and he said he was very pleased with it. I haven't been there recently. I'm going there next month to celebrate the 30th anniversary, and I look forward to seeing our kid grown up.
As and while we established this 全方位高质量前瞻性 partnership with China, I think China is running into difficulties with some developed countries. Reading from the Western reports, China has always been casted in a negative light.
Yeah.
However, if I talk to Chinese officials, they feel under siege.
Yeah.
What are the fundamental problems? Do you think there's anything that China needs to do right, or is it just misperception from the West?
I think the fundamental issue, I wouldn't say it's a problem. The fundamental issue is that China has changed so much from what it was to what it is today. First, the size. When China started its 改革开放, 1978, 13届三中全会, it was a very small part of the world economy and a negligible part of international trade. Today, it's 20% of the world economy and 20% of global trade. So anything which China does, whether it's good or it's bad, the impact on other countries is enormous. So the situation has changed. Secondly, China has developed and become much more advanced. In the earlier phase, it was growing, it was exporting, but it was making things which other countries needed and didn't make themselves. You make clothing, you make belts, buttons, you make lower-end electronics products, assembly of goods. Things which other countries were happy to say, well, it's not economic for me to do, China can do. But now China has moved up. All those products which are labor-intensive and which it used to make are migrating. They're going to Vietnam, they're going to Bangladesh, other third world countries. And China is moving up. And you are making EVs, or China is making EVs, you're making photovoltaic panels, you've got your pharmaceutical industries. You are in industries which are competing with similar advanced industries in the developed economies. So it's a more competitive relationship. And therefore, China's growth in the markets is not just benefiting the consumers, but also impacting the producers in the other countries. And that's difficult. You have to accommodate somehow, but it's difficult. Thirdly, because China's grown and developed so much, its interests around the world have also grown and developed. And not just in scale, but also in the things which you're concerned with. You have strategic interests, you have security interests, you have foreign policy interests in very far away parts of the world. The Belt and Road includes countries in South America. And in Africa, China is very active. So China's interface with the rest of the world is multifaceted. And then the question comes, who's number one, who's number two? How does number one and number two work together? Can you work together? So I think these are objective changes. There's no doubt that for the world, we are much better off with China like it is today than with China as it was 30 or 40 years ago or 50 years ago. But it means that there has to be an adjustment. It's not a matter of right and wrong, but it's in China's interest and it's in the world's interest that this adjustment has to be made. What is the adjustment? It is to acknowledge that the situation has changed. China's heft, its influence, its impact on the world is on a different scale. And you have to make adjustments to the accommodations and the rules which were set up at a time when China was much smaller. If you are a small economy and your exports actually don't threaten any of my industries, I'm prepared to cut you a lot of slack. You can subsidize them, you can protect your own market, you can use all sorts of you can have all sorts of different privileges which the more developed economies have decided not to have amongst themselves. But when you are not so underdeveloped and when you are huge and when your exports can be maybe 80% of the global manufacturing of photovoltaic panels, for example, solar panels, then those concessions are no longer politically tenable. And it has to be worked out and it has to be renegotiated so that you can have a good basis. I think that's very hard. That's one thing China has to do. On the other side, on the part of the other countries in the world, you have to get used to the fact that there's going to be a very big China in this world, a very powerful and developed China in this world, a China which has advanced technologies, which is going to be world-class in many areas and world-leading in some. And if we have to have some way to induct them into the global system and to accommodate their legitimate concerns and interests. And if you don't do that, then you say, no, I don't want China to be strong. I want it to remain always number 2 or better still number 2.5. I think that's going to head for a lot of mutual distrust and difficulties. But it's a very difficult adjustment to make because if you're at 2.5, you wish to become 2, and when you reach 2, you may wish to become 1.5. And so how to have that balance and wisdom to maintain a cooperative relationship which will benefit both sides. I think that takes statesmanship of a very high order on the part of the major powers.
Do you think it helps if China can explain itself better?
I think so. Talking is always useful, but at the same time, there has to be an acknowledgement of the real issues, the hard points, why there are differences with one another, and how we are prepared to accommodate one another. Because if all my claims are indubitable and beyond question, and the other side that says all my entitlements are also beyond doubt, then there's nothing to talk. Or I make you a speech and you make me a speech, and at the end we go away 两面不讨好, both unhappy. So it is necessary to have conversation, but it's also necessary to be able to make the accommodations and to take steps together which can gradually build trust and resolve difficulties. And one of the difficulties is, because of China's size, sometimes China will feel, but the other countries are doing it, why can't I? And the answer is, well, what to do? They are small, you are big. And when you are big, you have greater influence, but at the same time, there comes with it greater responsibilities and the need for restraint, because in a world without an international order, then 弱肉强食, the weak are eaten by the big. And there's the law of the jungle. As Thucydides says, the powerful do what they will and the weak suffer what they must. But if the world were like that, everybody is worse off, including the powerful ones, because they will fight each other to the death. So the great countries, the big countries, have to have a certain self-awareness and restraint and say, well, I'm entitled to this if you consult your lawyers and the international law, but I restrain myself. I'm not only aiming to be stronger than others, but to be accepted, respected, and if possible, to have others also admire me and want to have me as my friend. And I think that's a process.
Now the Americans and the Europeans are saying that China's industrial subsidies have led to overcapacity,
yes,
overinvestment.
Yes.
Do you think overcapacity is a real issue now?
I think in some industries, overcapacity is an issue. For example, steel. There's a worldwide glut of steel, and it happens every so many years. It's the nature of the steel market. It demand waxes and wanes and is never completely in balance. But there are also other industries like EVs or like solar panels, where China has very intense competition and very high production. Solar panels, I mentioned, they are 80% of the global market, and the capacity to produce actually is more than 100% of the demand of the whole world. So I think that is overcapacity. On EVs, if we talk about 内卷, I think EVs are a prime example because there are about 150 companies making EVs in China, and China is a big market, but you don't need 150 different brands of EVs. So in specific sectors, yes, I think there is overcapacity, and some of that will have come from state support and encouragement and financing. But if you take it overall, look at the overall manufacturing sector in China or the overall economy in China, I don't believe there is overcapacity. And IMF has studied this. They published a report recently. So if you look at this, manufacturing as a whole, the capacity utilization is respectable. Same like in other countries. So there's no overall overcapacity. But that doesn't mean there's no problem. So what is the problem? The problem is China is running a considerable export surplus, balance of payments, exports exceeding imports, trade surplus, and therefore it is having an impact on other economies and manufacturers elsewhere. And there's about 2% of China's GDP, the export surplus. which means it's about 0.5% of the world GDP. And that's not small. So what is the cause of that export surplus? It's really macroeconomics. It comes about because China has a very high savings rate, a relatively low consumption demand from within China. And if you're saving such a lot, you either have to invest all of it in China or you have to export some of it to the rest of the world. And it's not possible at China's present state of development to invest all that 40% of GDP within China, which is its savings rate. A lot of that is invested in building, construction, and the building industry, unfortunately, I think has gone. It went too far, and that is a problem, and that has to cut back. So how do you adjust? Either you boost consumption domestically, or it will be exported, and it will show up as a balance of payments surplus, which means a deficit for the other countries. America has the opposite problem, by the way. America saves too little, spends too much, and therefore has a balance of payments deficit, which is 3% of their GDP. But that's the other side of the problem. On the Chinese side, the solution over time has to be to increase the domestic consumption and bring the economy into a better external balance. It's not so easy to do because it's not just a matter of households spending more, but it's restructuring the economy so that the household earnings can rise, and particularly for those who are not already very, very well off and who will then spend the money. And the households must have the confidence to go out and to spend it, whether it's on travel, whether it's on food, whether it's on clothing, luxuries. They tell me that this year, during the golden weeks, the travel demand is less than in previous years. So that's a sign, but it goes beyond that. There has to be economic restructuring. The Chinese have talked about 国外国内双循环. That means external circulation. You have trade and economic interdependence with the outside world. But within the country, you want to have economic circulation and trade and demand created. And that's a slogan from about 2 years ago, but we haven't seen results yet. It is an important problem because if it's not resolved for China, never mind the rest of the world, for China, if this is not resolved, you can end up in a very difficult position where you can't get the confidence restored and you can't get the economy moving again. And that's something which I think China can avoid and should work to avoid.
This morning, a lot of discussion has been on China's economy. And the government has recently announced a series of stimulus package.
Yes.
What's your assessment of China's economy?
I think that the stimulus packages will be helpful in boosting confidence and then perhaps stimulating demand to the extent that the money will be spent and then there'll be some multiplier. But I think inherently at this phase, China's economy will grow slower than it used to. It used to grow 8-10% a year, sometimes even more than that. Now, if you can sustain 5% per year for another 10 years, I think you are doing well. And there are fundamental reasons for that. First of all, you're already more mature. It's not so easy to keep on just transforming yourself. Secondly, the labor force is not expanding anymore. The total population has peaked. The working age population has also peaked. It's leveled off, probably starting to come down already slowly. And so you can no longer just have a natural expansion of the economy. Secondly, I think with the external environment having turned less favorable, there is geostrategic tensions between China and America, even between China and Europe. And so that external environment is not as favorable as before. The foreign investments need more encouragement to come into China. The export markets are not as open as they used to be. So that is another factor which influences China's, not just the growth, but also the upgrading and transformation. Thirdly, partly in response to this external environment, I'm quite sure, but also for domestic reasons, I think the Chinese government's priorities have shifted some. In an earlier phase, the slogan was 发展是硬道理. Economic development is the topmost priority, is the hard truth. But now economic development is very important, but trumping that is national security, and I think equaling that at least is domestic political considerations. So in that situation, I think the environment for people to spend, for the environment for companies to start up, for big companies to build new businesses, I think will be more cautious. It's inevitable. So the government will give reassurances that they do want the private sector to have an important role. They do want entrepreneurs to have confidence. But the national security considerations are important. The political considerations cannot be ignored, and that has an impact. So these things, I think, will weigh on the Chinese economy, in addition to the specific economic problems, for example, dealing with a housing overhang and the construction problems, and the financial problems which come from that, for example, the debt.
So should we be pessimistic or optimistic?
Well, I think it is very unwise to write off China. I mean, this works in both directions. The Westerners say, we will do this, that, and the other, and China will stay down. I tell them you are wrong. They don't fully believe me. When I go to China, and sometimes the confidence with which my hosts expound their views cause me to tell them, the Americans have a lot of problems. You can see all of the problems. But they have a lot of strengths, and sometimes you can't see all of their strengths. And they are not going to disappear, and they will be there and formidable, I think, for a very long time to come. And I'm not sure whether they fully understand why I'm saying this. But I think on the Chinese... So I think both sides have this danger of underestimating the other. But on the Chinese side, there are some reasons which we can be confident that this is a country which is going to be there for a very long time. First of all, it's already been there 5,000 years. But even the factors which hold it back, for example, the fact that this population and workforce is not growing, are not things which have to bind and to paralyze it. The population may not be growing, but you can make better use of the population, the workforce. China's retirement age is very low. Women at 50, men at, I think, 55. And it's going to be adjusted now. The government is shifting it. Women going to 55, men going to 60. It's still quite low. But even that adjustment is not easy to make, and it's going to take them, I think, until about 20 years to achieve. So if you can stay productive longer, if you can stay active longer, if you can make full use of the women, 40顶半边天, and therefore they should not retire early. So that is one major source of growth capacity. Another one is the rural population. China has been urbanizing very systematically. Every year, about 1% of the population, 15 million people have been moving from rural to urban, to the cities. That means from the agricultural sector, from farming into the cities, manufacturing, providing services, maybe they're construction workers. But moving from the more traditional economy to the modern economy. But still, 35% of China's population is rural. And if you look at the developed countries, their farming population is like 2-3% of the population. That's all. So China's process is not complete yet. It's not, you have to work to make it carry on and to make it productive. You have to have jobs for them in the cities. You need to have hukou for them in the cities. You need to have homes for them in the cities. You need to provide for their kids in school. And you also must have agricultural reform so that it is possible for them to make use of the land which they have been farming and maybe lease it out to somebody or sell it to somebody else, consolidate, become bigger scale, more productive, and take that and go into the city and make a new life in the city. But these are all ways in which China can continue to grow. So that's the first reason I think we should not think that China has peaked. Secondly, I think in many areas, China is actually world-class. I talked about EVs, I talked about solar panels. Yes, there's overcapacity. Yes, there's state support, and that has maybe has given the companies an extra advantage. But in fact, there's a lot of very advanced and very high quality technology and science in the EVs, in the batteries, in the solar panels. And that is a big reason why the costs have come down and why the Chinese products are so competitive. And so it shows the Chinese can do it. And furthermore, which is my last reason, I think the Chinese people are quite determined to do it. They've seen what they can do. They have seen what other countries can do. And in some areas, they know they need to catch up. And when the Chinese say 站起来, 富起来, and 强起来, I think that determination is there, and it will cause them to move forward and to see through any difficulties there may be. So I have reasons for confidence, and I'm hopeful that the reasons for confidence will outweigh the signals for concern.
Coming back to Southeast Asia, a lot of the Chinese companies now, they are coming to this region, 卷出来. How would it impact us?
Well, we will notice them. China is huge. Its impact on Southeast Asia is very large. When their companies come, it means that they provide good products, good services, fierce competition. For our companies, for our industries, for our economies. In fact, we send our trade unionists and trade union leaders to go to China to visit Shenzhen, to visit Yangshan, to visit your high-tech centers, to see the factory lines, Fosun, to understand the drive, the hunger, the transformation which is taking place, and how advanced China is already. And they come back and they understand why we have to work hard and work harder. So I think the answer should be you have to work harder, and it will be an impetus for us to upgrade, transform our companies, train our people, retrain our people, be competitive, and meet the best in the world. And I think we can do that. I read, I think yesterday or today's Taobao had a quote from Christine Lagarde, who had the same sentiment, exhorting the Europeans to do that in the face of external uncertainties and the face of fierce competition, by which I'm sure she meant competition from China. And I think it's easier for us to do it in Singapore and in Southeast Asia than it is for Europe to do that.
So now, given that there are many Chinese companies in Singapore, and some people are labeling Singapore as a Singapore washing place, is the government concerned about this?
Well, we don't usually use labels like that. But we have companies in Singapore from all over the world. We welcome reputable companies to come here and to make use of our business environment, our pro-business climate, our infrastructure, our networks, and to contribute to Singapore's prosperity and link us to all parts of the world. So if the Chinese come, they are good companies, they create jobs, they pay well, they bring technology, they bring markets, I say come. The Americans come, I say the same. The British come, I say the same. The Japanese come. They are all here. But nobody believes that just because a company is in Singapore, that means it is a Singapore-owned company. We've got Dyson here. We've got General Electric here. We've got Citibank here. We've got all the major Japanese multinationals here. Everybody knows that they are Japanese, American, British companies. So when TikTok is in Singapore, everybody knows that TikTok's parent is ByteDance and TikTok's origins are in China. The CEO may be a Singaporean, but Singaporeans work for companies belonging to all kinds of shareholders. So on that basis, you're welcome in Singapore. But of course, we'd like to know where you come from and what your antecedents are. 何方神圣? Because if it turns out that you're not the one we think you are, we also would like to make a few more inquiries.
Okay. I would like to open it to the floor now. I have there are some questions here, but let's do one. 新加坡以善于吸纳人才著称，当前越来越多的优秀中国企业家和人才选择新加坡作为出海的第一站。可否请李资正分享新加坡在吸纳出海的中国企业家和人才方面，有哪些考虑？
I think, first of all, we are open to everybody, to people from around the world. If you are an entrepreneur, if you are a business person, if you can make a contribution to the Singapore economy, we welcome you to come to Singapore. You have to abide by our laws. You have to follow our rules. You also have to understand how our society works and fit in as a member of the Singaporean society. For example, we may be not as poorly off as we used to be, but we try very hard not to flaunt wealth, success. If you have a big car, please don't drive it at a high speed down Orchard Road in the middle of the night, for example. So these are some of the considerations. But when you come to Singapore, we ask, can you fit? Can you make a contribution? If you bring if you want to manage some of your assets out of Singapore, you're welcome. Even better, if you want to have your business operating in Singapore and have substantive business which is linked to factories, headquarters, research centers elsewhere in the world, even better. And on that basis, we have a good number of Chinese families and businesses here. But that's the way China has been talking about it. China says 走出去. So this is part of 走出去. 你们走出去，我们这边欢迎你进来。
So let us take some questions from the floor.
Okay.
Any questions from the floor? Maybe we can just have two questions because we're running out of time actually. 没有的话，我就再继续问啊。
There's a lady.
There's one. Could you please identify yourself before you ask the question and keep the question brief?
你好，我们的企业是在中国和新加坡。
您说一下您叫什么名字？
我叫
哪个？
我叫唐明我是在新加坡10年了，然后我们是在上海还有新加坡都有我们自己的投资和基金。那么在过去10年中，我们主要的工作是把新加坡优秀的企业进行投资了以后，回到苏州工业园区，回到中国这个市场去成长。 然后最近呢，我们也会从中国有一些好的 F&B 的这个品牌和企业在出海新加坡的时候，因为我们有专业的团队，我们可以帮助我们中国的企业落地到新加坡市场。那么我今天的问题是，因为新加坡作为咱们的一个亚洲金融中心，我们看到很多优秀的企业都愿意落地新加坡，并且辐射东南亚。在前一段时间呢，我们注意到咱们的政府正在积极的推行一个大胆的在股市场的一个改革的措施。其实这一块就是真的对于我们的企业家来说是非常非常乐于见到的一个事情。那么会提升本市的一个股市的活力，对。所以我的问题是在这一块有没有什么信息可以给我们透露到，说未来这个咱们新加坡的股市会有什么新的措施？然后有没有机会我们更多的企业可以在新加坡进行一个上市的一个机会？谢谢。
I'm not familiar with the ins and outs of the review of the stock exchange. I know it's in progress. I know that we would like to inject more vibrance and dynamism in our stock exchange. And we welcome reputable, good companies to come to Singapore to list in Singapore. We have had some from China, mostly smaller ones. The results have been mixed, some good, some harder to assess, because it's not easy to have a stock listed overseas from where the company's business is, when that overseas market and the investors there may not know exactly what's happening with the company's actual operations. So that has been a practical difficulty, but we would still like to have good companies come and list here, and it's being studied now. But there's no impediment to companies wanting to come to Singapore to list if they fulfill the requirements. If you know of any, please put them in touch with the stock exchange. Or if you know of any impediments to companies you think should come but for some reason don't fit our rules, please let us know and we will look at our rules.
资政，我接下来还要问您的问题，是不是可以请您用中文来回答？
可以，是什么问题呢？
资政，您退下来之后，现在会比较有时间？
稍微多一点时间。
我不知道您是不是会玩这个线上的游戏？您是不是有玩过这个？
我没什么玩线上游戏，可是听说最近有一个新的游戏，不是线上的，是电脑里面的，很红，就是黑神话。
黑神话悟空。
悟空。
我的问题其实比较简单，就是新加坡的学生其实学中文学华文学得非常的吃力。您觉得就是让他们多玩一些这些游戏，是不是有点帮助？您会鼓励您的孙女玩这样的游戏？
这个很难回答的问题。我看是有帮助，但是必须适可而止。那个黑神话是一个很高档次的电脑游戏，我不会玩它。我上网去 YouTube 去看那个视频。动作很快，他的招法一来一往，目不暇接，我看都看不清楚他做什么，他已经一边输了。所以如果我要做天命人，去参加这个游戏，去跟这些妖怪魔鬼去斗的话，我看我没办法争回这个6根旗，完全没有希望。所以最好让电脑游戏达人去做，我在这边6根清净就好了。我的孙女还太小，还没有到他们还没有到这个年龄。到这个年龄，他可能有兴趣。不过这个打斗的游戏通常是男孩子喜欢玩的。至于学华语呢，我想有它的作用，因为我们希望孩子学华语的用意不只是语言，而是也希望他们能够吸收中华文化、中华传统，了解这个非常丰富的文化内涵。 所以像孙悟空这样的《西游记》这样的名书，我看如果你长大你不知道谁是孙悟空是有问题的，或者你长大你不知道谁是诸葛亮《三国演义》，那也是有问题。可是如果你只听，你只学过背成语，整个成语词典，三顾茅庐了，什么司马昭之心了，那很没有意思，很枯燥无味的。你必须懂得这个故事，那些成语才会很清楚的在你的头脑里面。所以如果你可以看了玩了黑神话之后，会有兴趣去看《西游记》的电影，或者甚至读吴承恩的书，那是最好的。我希望我们可以通过这些比较软的渠道，鼓励学生去，不只是学习华语，同时是吸收一些中华文化的内涵。
但是就别玩上瘾了。
所以说适可而止，到时间就必须停了。
资政您卸任之后，我们从旁观察，觉得您好像比较轻松，是不是这个事实是不是这样？您可以跟我们说一下，现在您的作息跟您在当总理的时候是不是不同吗？
轻松倒不觉得，不过负担减轻了一点，那个是事实。因为我已经卸任了，是资政跟总理很大的不同。总理第一时间事情发生了，你必须做反应。最后问题讨论了，要做决定了，你必须做最后的决定。资政不需要做第一时间的反应，也不能够做最后的决定。我只能够提供意见，让总理参考，供内阁参考，参加他们的讨论，帮忙大家能够以他们的方式处理他们所面对的问题。现在的问题我比较熟悉，因为这个问题这些很少问题是突如其来的，这些都有相当一段历史的。日子过了一段时间以后的问题，新的挑战，新的机遇，新的政策，这些都必须是由新的领导层去办的。我的角色应该慢慢的淡下来，所以退的应该越来越裸退了。现在还没有到那个基点。
但是我们非常希望就是资政您继续保持这样的状态，特别是在这个世界纷纷扰扰的时候，我们也希望能够继续听您非常中肯的这个分析和看法。
我当然会尽力而为。
谢谢。因为时间已经过了，我请大家
慧玲，我们还有多一点时间，可以由您发问，或者是请现场观众发问。对，我们今天是特别安排更多的时间。
可以。
但是我们的这个节奏已经被打断了。台下有一个问题，来。
资政你好，这个问题跟美国大选有关。这个问题呢是一个问题是，如果说是哈里斯当选，或者是特朗普当选，你觉得在处理中美新三边关系当中，哪一个更容易一些？谢谢。
哪一个
更容易一些？对您
容易一些？
对，容易一些。对，
我想都很困难。No, let me explain. I speak in English because I want to speak very carefully. The elections are in 3 weeks' time. I think the hostility, the tensions between China and the US are not personality-based. There are forces, there are deep attitudes which are formed on both sides, and a social consensus on the American side that China is a challenger, a rival, even a threat to America in the long term, potentially. And on the Chinese side, a very deep conviction that the Americans want to stop us from matching them, certainly would not allow us to overtake them and even overtly say that they would prefer us to be behind them. So this is a very fundamental contradiction which is not going to go away. And on the American side, there are not many issues where the Democrats and the Republicans agree. But this is one.
Yeah.
And that is a very serious matter. So whether it's Harris or whether it's Trump, that's not going to be changing. I think with Harris, it will progress in a more predictable way with fewer sudden shocks and less risk of things going completely out of control, but that basic attitude is not going to change. With Trump, things can progress in a much more, how shall we put it, in many more sudden directions. For example, he has said that the day after he comes into office, he will put 60% tariffs on Chinese products and 10% on everybody else. And he may possibly do that. It's within his power to do that. And if he does that, you are in uncharted territory. And I think from the record of the previous Trump administration, he will have a team with him who will have certain ideas how they want to do this. And he will depend on the team, but he will also ad-lib and do things which you didn't quite expect him to do. And in particular, I think what you can anticipate is that his attitude towards allies, towards America's friends, will be different from what the Democrat administration has done in these last 4 years. So when they ask the Pope this question, whom he prefers, after he visited Singapore on his way home, the Pope says it's a very difficult question. I don't know how to choose. And if the Pope doesn't know, I don't know either.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
OK， 各位，让我们以热烈的掌声，谢谢李资政今天跟我们做的这个无间对话。
谢谢你，伟伟。
姐妹们总烦恼脸上细纹、干燥与暗沉，现在起跟我一起放心交给 KS Royal Face 皇家颜值逆时奇迹系列。KS Royal Face 皇家颜值逆时奇迹系列，它添加5种 EGF， 专门防止肌肤老化，强化皮肤修复，增加肌肤弹性水嫩，轻松抚平皱纹，换回青春自信。KS Royal Face 皇家颜值逆时奇迹，护肤露、全效精华、精华霜，即刻启动冻龄密码。